Hello, America. This is Call of Duty Goddess. Today is December the 3rd, 2016. I saw an article from Freedom Outpost that I really wanted to share. Thought it was important. Slovakia passes a law to ban Islam from being registered as a religion. Slovakia is not wrong. Islam is much more than just a religion. Islam is a comprehensive system, a political, military, legal, religious, and dietary. And I'm going to show you that Islam is not, in fact, a religion, that it is a totalitarian system of control, and it does not belong in the United States of America. It is against our Constitution. You cannot have Islam without Sharia. Even according to the Council on Foreign Relations, Sharia is the path in Arabic. Sharia guides all aspects of Muslim life, including daily routines, familial and religious obligations, and financial dealings. It is derived primarily from the Qur'an and the Sunnah, the sayings, practices, and teachings of the Prophet Muhammad.
Now the word Sharia refers to Islamic law, but literally the term means path to water, implying the way a Muslim should live his life. It talks about commerce, it talks about marriage and civil law, it talks about the way warfare should be waged, and so Sharia refers to pretty much everything that a Muslim will do in his or her life.
So now that we know that Sharia law encompasses everything in Islam, and it's basically intertwined, I want to just cement it once more with the Islamic Supreme Council of America, understanding Islamic law. Islamic civilization since the time of the Prophet Muhammad until now is firmly founded on the concept of rule of law. For that reason, the law is published and known, and citizens and courts are expected to uphold it. In addition, Muslim citizens must adhere to Islamic law, Sharia. It even states on their page, Islam is a complete package, a complete message and way of life. So now that there's no doubt in our minds of what Islam is and how it is intertwined with Sharia, you cannot have Islam without Sharia. Let's see how it's comparable with the American Constitution.
Do you feel more comfortable living under American law, or do you feel more comfortable living under Sharia law?
Sharia law.
I'm a Muslim. I prefer Sharia law.
Sharia law, yes.
You prefer Sharia law over American law?
Of course, yeah. Of course, yeah.
And do you find most of your friends feel the same way?
Yeah, of course. If you're Muslim, yeah.
Now let's go to the American Civil Liberties Union and see what they say about the right to religious freedom. What is religious freedom exactly? The First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution says that everyone in the United States has a right to practice his or her own religion, or no religion at all. Our country's founders, who were of different religious backgrounds themselves, knew the best way to protect religious liberty was to keep the government out of religion. So they created the First Amendment to guarantee the separation of church and state. This fundamental freedom is a major reason why the U.S. has managed to avoid a lot of the religious conflicts that have torn so many other nations apart. That last statement by the ACLU is not entirely true from a historical perspective. And when you look at history, I have to give you a fair warning. In history, the real history, there is no party that is not guilty of something. We're all guilty of something, even the religious. I myself consider myself a Protestant Christian. When I found what the Protestants did, it didn't make me feel too good, but I do believe it happened. So let's continue. You see, many of the British and North American colonies that eventually formed the United States of America were settled in the 17th century by men and women who, in the face of European persecution, refused to compromise passionately held religious convictions and fled Europe. A great majority left Europe to worship God in the way they believed to be correct. However, what ended up happening in America is the very same thing that people were fleeing in Europe. All of the states that were started became states of one religious sect or another. For instance, intolerance in Virginia. In his notes on the state of Virginia, Thomas Jefferson reflected on the religious intolerance in 17th century Virginia. Let's hear it from Thomas Jefferson's own writing. The first settlers in this country were immigrants from England, of the English Church, just at a point of time when it was flush with complete victory over the religious of all other persuasions. Possessed as they became of the powers of man-king, administering and executing the laws, they shewed equal intolerance in this country with their Presbyterian brethren, who had immigrated to the northern government. The poor Quakers were flying from persecution in England. They cast their eyes on these new countries as asylums of civil and religious freedom, but they found them free only for the reigning sect. Several acts of the Virginia Assembly of 1659, 1662, and 1693 had made it penal in parents to refuse to have their children baptized, had prohibited the unlawful assembling of Quakers, and made it penal for any master of a vessel to bring a Quaker into the state, had ordered those already here and such as should come thereafter to be imprisoned till they should adjure the country, provided a milder punishment for their first and second return, but death for their third, had inhibited all persons from suffering their meetings in or near their houses, entertaining them individually, or disposing of books which supported their tenants. If no execution took place here, as did in New England, it was not owing to the moderation of the church, or the spirit of the legislature, as may be inferred from the law itself, but to historical circumstances which have not been handed down to us. The Anglicans retained full possession of the country about a century. Now, you heard in Thomas Jefferson's own words that he was very disturbed by the turn that religions had taken once they gained control. When a religion is mixed with a government, they then take control and make laws that are contrary to people that are not of that particular religious sect. It bothered Thomas Jefferson tremendously, and you could hear it within his writing. Now, what Thomas Jefferson did in both 1776 and 1786 is what's most crucial to our religious freedoms. So let's see what he did.
I'm Tom Camden, Director of Special Collections at the Library of Virginia. I have here another cornerstone in the nation's history, probably one of the most important documents certainly in Virginia's history, and has a direct constitutional link. This is known to many as Thomas Jefferson's Statute for Religious Freedom, officially known as an Act for Establishing Religious Freedom. Thomas Jefferson began lobbying for such a principle to be made law in of course 1776, the freedom to worship as one please. However, this proposal, this Act for Establishing Religious Freedom, for which I'm showing you is the enrolled bill, was not actually introduced until June 12, 1779. It was talked about a lot, but the resolution did not get through until 1779, and then it took until January 16, 1786 before it was actually passed. This Act for Establishing Religious Freedom, of course, has become an extraordinary component of the nation's Bill of Rights. There is a segment that's very powerful, and I'd like to read that because I think it makes much more of an impact than the very verbose principle of the preamble. It says, "We, the General Assembly of Virginia, do enact that no man shall be compelled to frequent or support any religious worship place or ministry whatsoever, nor shall be enforced, restrained, molested, or burdened in his body or goods, nor shall otherwise suffer on account of his religious opinions or belief. But that all men shall be free to profess and by argument to maintain their opinions in matters of religion, and that the same shall in no wise diminish, enlarge, or affect their civil capacity."
Now, Thomas Jefferson not only witnessed the intolerance in Virginia, which compelled him to create a legislation to give freedom of religion and make sure that there was a separation of state and church, which is crucial to what is happening today with Islam. Islam is inseparable from the state and the church. It is not a religion. It is a totalitarian system, and I believe it should not be allowed in America as a religion, because it is not. It is intertwined with Sharia law. Therefore, it is totally incompatible with the American Constitution. Let's go further and see how Thomas Jefferson experienced Islam for the first time. When the United States was founded, our military frigates and our commerce ships were being attacked by pirates, but not your ordinary pirates. These were known as the Barbary pirates, named after the Barbary coast of Africa with ties to Turkey and the coast of Saudi Arabia. These forces not only sank our ships, but took the crew as slaves to the pirate leaders. The captains of the ships were ransomed to the United States. Then President George Washington signed off on a tax system across our country. It seemed to him ironic that a country founded on rebellion from unnecessary taxes was having to authorize taxes to the states. By 1783, 6% of the United States budget was paid out to these Barbary forces. Literally thousands of vessels were taken and more than 1 million Europeans and Americans were sold into slavery. In 1783, President Washington sent an envoy to meet with Barbary corsairs consisting of Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and John Adams. When meeting with their ambassador, they were told about this new religion, Islam, that had dominated the belief system of the Barbary corsairs. Thomas Jefferson then documented the meetings that took place in order to bring them before Congress. Some of the notes that Thomas Jefferson took are as follows. Grosvenor Square, March 28, 1786. Soon after the arrival of Mr. J. in London, we had a conference with the ambassador of Tripoli at his house. The amount of all the information we could obtain from him was that a perpetual peace was in all respects the most advisable, because a temporary treaty would leave room for increasing demands upon every renewal of it, and a stipulation for annual payments would be liable to failures of performance which would renew the war, repeat the negotiations, and continually augment the claims of his notion, and the difference of expense would by no means be adequate to the inconvenience, since 12,500 guineas to his constituents with 10% upon that sum for himself must be paid if the treaty was made for only 1 year. We took the liberty to make some inquiries concerning the grounds of their pretensions to make war upon nations who had done them no injury, and observed that we considered all mankind as our friends, who had done us no wrong, nor had given us any provocation. The ambassador answered us that it was founded on the laws of their prophet, that it was written in their Qur'an, that all nations who should not have acknowledged their authority were sinners, that it was their right and duty to make war upon them wherever they could be found, and to make slaves of all they could take as prisoners, and that every Mussulman who should be slain in battle was sure to go to paradise. That it was a law that the first who boarded an enemy's vessel should have one slave, more than his share with the rest, which operated as an incentive to the most desperate valor and enterprise. That it was the practice of their corsairs to bear down upon a ship, for each sailor to take a dagger in each hand and another in his mouth, and leap on board, which so terrified their enemies that very few ever stood against them. That he verily believed the devil assisted his countrymen, for they were almost always successful. Now, I think you can come to some conclusions about Thomas Jefferson just by his writing. Number one, what he witnessed in America was nothing but religious persecution over and over and over again. He did not like it. He always took up for the low guy. He took up for the Quakers. Then he was sent on a mission. He then witnessed the same thing over again. We, as Americans, were paying a jizya tax from the get-go in this country to Muslims. We continued to do so until the Leathernecks were created, the Marine Corps. But it is imperative that you decide for yourself where this man's mind was. Was he a person who enjoyed reading the Qur'an? Do you think he wanted to become a devout Muslim? Do you think he was a devout Christian? Or do you think that he got the Qur'an in order to read it to know his enemies? If it were me, I would do the same thing, and actually I have, because I want to know my enemies. This is not a religion. This is against our Constitution. And do you find it odd that in 1786, the very same year that Thomas Jefferson met with the Barbary pirates to discuss the jizya tax we had already been paying, do you find it odd or coincidental that the act for establishing religious freedom was put into law in that same year of 1786? I don't find it odd at all, and I don't find it as a coincidence. Our country, Thomas Jefferson in particular, I believe, was fed up with the aspect of religion intermingling with law. He states it on many accounts of laws that were established through the church by lawmakers. You can see it in the notes that he took on Virginia. You can see it in the notes that he took when he was having talks with the Barbary pirates. It's also my belief that Thomas Jefferson knew exactly what would happen in a world without religion. That's why when he lived in Virginia, he went to many churches. He went to revivals. He got to know the people. He connected with the people. But he also knew the dangers that religions could impose. And that is why our country has a separation of church and state. And if you read the laws properly, if you look at the proper history, if you look at the notes that were taken all throughout history and what happened, put them in the time frame that they belong, you will see that the separation of church and state is to protect us from religions such as Islam. So in looking back at this article again, the article should read, the United States passed a law in 1786 to ban Islam from being registered as a religion, because Islam is intertwined with law, Sharia law. And in this country, in 1786, a law was passed that separated the church and the state. I'll leave all the links below. This is Call of Duty Goddess signing off, and as always, I've got your 6.